For years, China has been considered the front-runner in terms of electrification, but now it looks like one of the two largest economies in the world is losing momentum. EV sales are slowing down, and just like the rest of the world, most EV automakers struggle not just to improve sales, but also to make EVs profitable. Reasons are numerous, so make sure to stay with us and check the key reasons why we're pretty sure that the greatest Chinese EV market crash is coming. Number 5. Growth of EV market slows down. The last few years were characterized by incredible growth of the EV market in China. Eventually, the number of plug-in electric cars, which includes both battery electric and plug-in hybrids, went up to 8 million units just in 2023. The total market share of plug-in electric cars is currently around 37%, which looks great, but only until you take a little bit of a closer look, because it turns out that the growth has slowed down significantly. Back in 2020, the share of plug-in electric vehicles was 6.3%. In 2021, it went up by 15%, and finally up to 30% in 2022. What this tells us is that the growth has slowed down significantly. For a few years in a row, it was way over 100%, but in the last year, it remained at 46%, clearly indicating the loss of momentum. Moreover, this percentage includes both EVs and plug-in hybrids, as we've already mentioned. If we look solely at EVs, they've accounted for about 25% in 2023, while year-over-year growth was just 31%. It turns out that the last year was all about plug-in hybrids, considering that these slightly more conventional layouts have risen by 80% in the last year. It accounted for 12% of the market. In other words, just like Americans, Chinese citizens are starting to prefer plug-in hybrids more, probably because they're cheaper and there's no range and charging anxiety. Also, let's not forget the limitations of the Chinese domestic population in terms of the financial power of its citizens. It's notably lower compared to North America and Europe, so these days, when the Chinese economy is losing momentum, Chinese citizens rather invest in real estate than expensive electric cars. Moreover, just like in North America, the phase of early adopters seems to be over, while the middle class is not willing to accept new ways of transportation. Number 4. Thousands of dealers no longer in business. Last year, China became the world's largest car exporting nation, surpassing Japan after decades of dominance. And while Chinese car makers are conquering the world with their attractive prices, things are not going particularly well in the domestic market. The era of massive growth, and we're not talking just about EVs, is behind us. The peak was years ago, back in 2017, when 24 million cars were sold. Today, numbers are dropping notably, as the last year ended with a total score of 21.7 million. Of course, the ones that suffer the most are dealers, as the overproduction of electrified cars has made it extremely hard to sell vehicles. As a result, thousands of dealers already went into bankruptcy. And no, we don't talk about small players. This slowdown pushed even the biggest players into bankruptcy. The best example is the Guangdong Yonggao Investment Group. That company had 80 outlets across the southern province of Guangdong. This dealer network was selling several brands, including some of the most prominent names in the world, such as Honda and Volvo, as well as the Chinese GAC Ion. Suddenly, the dealer notified customers that the company had gone into bankruptcy and that all orders were suspended. As a result, there are literally thousands of people who are now waiting to see whether they're about to get their promised vehicle or at least their money back. According to insiders, this fall has been happening for a while, as reports of employees making complaints to the Dongguan government about withheld wages have been circulating around since last April. Today, we can hear that the company's employees have been owed wages for months, and now they most likely won't receive anything. Number 3. EV graveyards across China. EV graveyards are a new phenomenon that is currently exclusive to China but have no doubt will spread around the world if politicians continue to push EVs too hard. Practically every bigger city in China has one of these. Just imagine a scene of hundreds, if not thousands, of EVs left in the field, rotting away. That's pretty much a regular thing in today's China. For the rest of the world, it should be a valuable lesson that confirms yet again that we must respect the basic rule of demand and supply. So what exactly happened here? Years ago, the Chinese authorities decided to go full throttle with electric cars. This was the only way for the Chinese automotive industry to get a major role in the global market, as it was very unlikely to catch up with Western legacy car makers when it comes to internal combustion engines. Therefore, the government started giving massive support to everyone involved in the production of electric cars. Suddenly, Chinese EV startups started multiplying, leading to a total number of over 500 EV makers by 2027. Of course, it was obvious that such a state is unsustainable. Seeing hundreds of EV makers making solid sales figures seems unrealistic even for such a huge market. On the other hand, the main condition to get government financial support was to sell a certain number of vehicles. It was time for an organized scheme where these startups started selling their EVs to car-sharing companies even though they never had the intention to use them. Even though licensed and registered, these EVs were rarely used. In most cases, they weren't particularly good in terms of range and performance either. Logically, the only possible outcome for them was to end up in these so-called EV graveyards. This was the way small EV companies figured out how to get much-needed financial support. However, with the inability to sell their EVs on the regular market, most of them ended up in bankruptcy. From over 500 EV startups in 2017, that number went down to 91 in 2023. And all of this indicates that the number will continue to fall down for several reasons that we'll talk about in a moment. Number 2. Most EV makers will go into bankruptcy soon. As we've just mentioned, Chinese EV startups struggle a lot for several reasons. Even though able to sell a decent number of vehicles, they still haven't figured out how to make a profit on them. Used to big government support, these wealthy startups never managed to crack the EV economy. As a result, there are no more than a couple of companies that actually make a profit. The rest of the pack is losing money, a lot of it. Only in the last few months, we saw several cases of EV startups going into bankruptcy. This includes some pretty big names too, companies that looked extremely promising just a few years ago. Some of the most prominent examples are companies like Evergrande New Energy Auto, which was part of a much greater conglomerate with pretty much unlimited resources. And in such a tucked-away position, it never managed to figure out how to make a profit. Moreover, it never managed to sell its models in relatively decent numbers. As a result, the latest calculation suggests that this company has lost $17 million on each vehicle it sold. Of course, this isn't an isolated case. Many other companies went out of business, including Ledin, VW, and Neutron. Even companies like NIO struggle a lot. The Shanghai-based company recorded a massive $2.9 billion loss in 2023, even though sales figures were pretty impressive in the fourth quarter. During these 3 months, the company managed to sell over 50,000 vehicles, but the latest estimation suggests that the first quarter of this year is going to be notably slower, with expected sales figures of around 30,000. Number 1. Most EV makers are doomed. With the EV market slowing down, it's obvious that most EV companies will eventually go into bankruptcy. As mentioned earlier, the number went down significantly from 500 in just a few years ago. Today, it's estimated that there are around 90 companies left in the business, but if we could trust our insiders, at least 1/3 of them don't produce more than 500 vehicles quarterly. Their days are numbered, but they're not the only ones. Because if we look at the current market share, it turns out that the top 10 brands account for more than 80% of the plug-in market. Moreover, BYD holds 33.8% of the market. Tesla accounts for 7.5% of the plug-in segment, while other notable players are companies like GAC Ion, SAIC GM Wuling, Li Auto, Changan, and Geely, each accounting for 6% or less. Add to this the fact that BYD is probably the only Chinese EV maker that made EVs profitable, as well as the ongoing price war imposed by the same company, and it becomes obvious that the majority of the remaining companies will vanish soon. Eventually, the number of Chinese EV companies will go down to just a few, including Chinese legacy car makers such as Geely and MG, which can survive this price war only because of their solid position in markets abroad. Thanks for watching and see you next time.